Hello, trauma warriors. I'm Janae with Defeating Childhood Trauma, and today we are going to talk about mental abuse, what it's like in covert stage, how it escalates, and the lasting effects it has on the victim. And if you caught last week's episode, you might be thinking, isn't it the same as emotional abuse? While true, emotional abuse is also going to be mental. And in fact, there are things that the emotional abuser has in common with the mental abuser. But the difference is mental abuse isn't always going to have an emotional component, which makes it even more dangerous. Because when someone is mentally abusing you without the emotional involvement, then it's the sneakiest, most insidious abuse of all. So, with that said, let's get started. Reading an excerpt from my article, Covert Abuse 7 Types You Need to Know, and link will be in the description. So, what are the emotions and body sensations that are cluing you in that you might be mentally abused? Muscle tension, held breath, confusion, and fear. And it's so insidious, this type of abuse, that it had to actually come with a special note first. Special note: setting boundaries, teaching children values, and that inappropriate behaviors have consequences is good parenting, not mental abuse. What's described here is the type of abuse that's cloaked under the illusion of teaching values. The most covert of all, particularly if other covert abuses are either absent or kept to a minimum. This type is equal parts controlling and gaslighting. This is the parent or partner who rarely raises their voice, so that their demands for what's good for the household is delivered with kindness. The mental abuser has trust issues with other people's boundaries and tends to make the worst assumptions. For example, wanting to talk on the phone in privacy is met with questions by the abuser, who wonders if you have something to hide. Spending more than the perception of enough time grooming may cause the abuser to question the victim's vanity or attention-seeking issues. Now let's pause in our reading here and digest the mental abuser. They're going to make the worst possible assumptions, especially when boundary issues come up. So you could say that what's in the core of the mental abuser is paranoia, and they're very controlling. Want to know where you are and what you are doing because of the worst assumptions they are making inside their head. The mental abuser also believes that they know best, and that's another reason why they are controlling. So, in the covert state of mental abuse, the mental abuser isn't going to accuse. The mental abuser is going to ask questions, and very, very calmly, and maybe even with a smile on their face. Because the mental abuser believes that they know best, then everything that they want makes perfect sense. Everything will work out as long as you do exactly what I want. The good news is the most mental abusers are also going to use some of the other types of abuses. And that makes it more obvious so that we can validate ourselves and start making an exit strategy once we understand we're being abused. One example is the somatic narcissist that I dated way back in the day, which is what inspired me to include that part of spending more than the perceived enough time getting ready. If I spent more than 10 minutes in front of the mirror getting ready for work, Here come the questions. Why are you getting dolled up for work? Is there someone at work you're trying to impress? Because you're supposed to be going to work, not look good for other people. Fortunately, there were also lots of emotional abuse and social and financial abuse going on so that I was able to validate myself. However, in some rare cases, if the other abuses are absent or kept to an extreme covert level, it's very, very difficult to detect. Now, here's a great example of pure mental abuse and nothing else. There was a Netflix show a few years back. I want to say either 2020 or 2021. It was called The Wilds. And if you watch no other episode in that Netflix series, watch episode 8. You get Shelby's background story. Her father was a classic mental abuser, and that was the only type of abuse he was using. In the very opening of that background sequence, we see Shelby in the kitchen with her sibling and her mom, and they are all laughing together, getting their breakfast ready, and everyone's relaxed until dad walks into the kitchen. And then immediately everyone silences. They tense up, the smiles freeze on their faces. And dad says, "Good morning. What are you doing?" Very calm voice. He's even smiling. And so everyone scrambles to make sure that dad gets the best breakfast and he gets the first breakfast. Dad even tells them when he finishes that it was a very good breakfast. He isn't complaining at all. And yet, the tension in the air just from the father walking in the room makes you wonder, what is going on here? And you're left wondering, at some point, this man is going to explode because we're trying to understand why his family is always on guard and tensing up around him. And spoiler alert, the father never explodes. He never loses his temper. He stays calm and smiling throughout the entire episode. And we see that Shelby is an absolute daddy's girl. She just loves her father. He's such a good person. He is a preacher, and she is in the role of the perfect princess. She's in pageants and a devout Christian, and she wants to make daddy proud. And then it's slowly revealed that Shelby is secretly attracted to girls. And so later on, she has her friend over, this girlfriend that she wants to be more than friends with. Shelby wants to close the door to her bedroom, and her father is right there, stopping her from closing the door, and in his usual calm, smiling fashion. "Why do you need to close the door? That isn't necessary." Because with a mental abuser, that's some of the language they're going to use. "There's no need to keep secrets in this house." Because, like I said, they're secretly making the worst possible assumptions about someone else, and they want to control due to that paranoia. And so, with a mental abuser, it's very, very difficult to detect because if they're calm and seemingly nice all the time, it's difficult to validate that experience. So, for anyone who might suspect they're being mentally abused, a good check in would be, where is the tension in my life? And then, if it involves someone close in your life, and that is the source of your muscles tensing up, holding your breath, feeling on edge a little bit, you might want to stop and question. If this is a good person, then why am I tensing up every time I'm around them? Because nice does not mean that they're good. There is definitely a difference between nice and good. So now let's explore what happens when covert mental abuse escalates. escalates into overt. Speaking up against this is often and easily met with resistance by the mental abuser, who challenges the victim to name what it is that's off. The abuse has run on such a subliminal level that it's hard for the victim to find the words. If the victim does find a word or two, classic gaslighting language immediately ensues. Over time, those questions the mental abuser had in covert state turn into full-blown accusations. The mental abuser now knows that you have something to hide and will therefore go through your personal belongings relentlessly in order to confirm and exploit. The mental abuser is not above reading their child's diary. So, mental abuse escalates when the mental abuser decides to go snooping and looking for ways to confirm their paranoid delusions. And it's all in the name of, aha, I knew it, I was right. Because why? The mental abuser believes they're always right. They know best, even when they're absolutely clueless. And what you did could have been nothing, but they're making a mountain out of a molehill. And so when you call out the mental abuser on their abuse, of course they're going to look at you crazy and ask you to name what are you talking about, because their headspace is paranoid and they know best. They're controlling because if they don't control you, then this worst case scenario that only exists in their head is going to happen. And so when you go against the mental abuser, that's when they got to gather that evidence to prove their case that you must be controlled. And here again, this is not excusing the mental abuser at all, because I will not ever make excuses for abusers. This is just to help you make sense out of abusers who make zero sense. Case in point, my borderline mother enjoyed snooping through my bag, snooping through everything, okay? Trying to gather evidence, making a mountain out of a molehill. She would find an assignment that I got a D on and go, oh, a D? Just to confirm that I was stupid and lazy. Other examples, finding notes written by one of my friends. You're bad, you're wild because this friend was talking about a guy with a cute butt. You're going wild. We've got to curb that. And see, it's all about finding some sort of information that can confirm their worst suspicions, their paranoia. And so that's how mental abuse escalates. Just a few more examples. She also couldn't tolerate me speaking on the phone privately. She had to be in the room whenever a friend called me so that she could hear what I was saying. And mostly she was paranoid that I was going to talk about her. One time in particular, I happened to answer the phone in my room and I was talking to my friend and I felt this sense of someone hovering nearby. I think I sensed her energy or something. So I told my friend, hold on. And so I opened my bedroom door and there's my mother standing right there on the other side. She looked shocked because, she was caught. So now she's embarrassed. So she had to go on the offense and say, if you run me down to the dogs, we're going to have a problem. And I was like, I am not doing that. So I get back on the phone with my friend, and first thing my friend says is, I heard all of that. And I was like, yeah, I know. Not talking about it, not talking about it. And so those are just a few examples of the mental abuser hating boundaries and wanting to control everything, wanting to find that evidence so that they can exploit it and confirm in their heads their paranoia. And, here again with my mother, I was also experiencing all of the other types of abuses by her. So it was pretty obvious to me that I was being abused. But here again, giving you some examples of mental abuse in the covert stage and how it escalates. So now let's explore the lasting effects of this type of abuse. Lasting effects of mental abuse: gaslighting one's own self, doubting one's own intuition by using typical gaslighting language on one's own self. For example, I'm being stupid or paranoid, or I'm imagining things, being most common. No matter how often one's intuition was proven correct, there tends to be that lingering self doubt. Gaslighting environments tend to produce ongoing issues with one's own self. And I want to pause right here. What have we been saying about the mental abuser all along? That they are the ones who are being paranoid. They are the ones who are imagining these worst possible scenarios in their head. And how interesting it is that when we're mentally abused, we tend to doubt ourselves. We tend to call ourselves, oh, I'm being stupid. Oh, I'm being paranoid. Oh, I'm imagining things. Just because your mental abuser was being stupid, paranoid, and imagining things doesn't mean that you are, my friend. So please take that to heart. Now, let's continue with other lasting effects of mental abuse. Toxic shame. And what is toxic shame? Well, an excerpt from Trauma Glossary 2 on my site is obliterated self-esteem, where one views oneself as fatally flawed. Example: bad, ugly, stupid, crazy. This is part of the faulty programming engineered by years of parental splitting, projection, and unfair blaming. See also shame spiral. And a note at the end: toxic shame is considered one of the 5 most common and troublesome symptoms of complex PTSD. Now, the next lasting effect of mental abuse: isolation. When one's privacy was constantly invaded, it amplifies the emotional need for it, especially when one was never told they had any right to set boundaries. And remember, the mental abuser hates boundaries. Boundaries are a threat and triggers their paranoia. And so when we've been mentally abused, it's like we are starved for more time to ourselves than average. I've even referred to it as solitude greed, because it's just this chronic hunger for a little privacy that we never had when we were around the mental abuser, who was too preoccupied with controlling everything. And the last of the lasting effects of mental abuse: crisis of identity. Never allowed to discover one's true self, those who leave the mental abuser are often shocked by how little they really know about themselves. Tools for identity self-discovery are in Master Toolbox 1, which is also on my site. So you're being told who you are, or else the questions. Well, if you're not this person I want you to be, why not? Then, are you having certain motives or urges that I disagree with, and I've told you they are wrong? And they'll do it with a smile. So, not having boundaries, not having privacy, not being allowed to be your own person because you're being gently coerced into being who this mental abuser thinks you should be. Yeah, it's going to cause a crisis of identity, of not knowing who you really are, because you're being kind of shoehorned into a certain character that isn't authentically you. So, here again, how do we heal from mental abuse? First, get away from that mental abuser because the mental abuser is bad for your mental health. Seriously, get away from that person. Just because they're nice doesn't mean they're good. Secondly, dare to discover yourself without the shame. There's nothing wrong with not being the person they were trying to shoehorn you into being. Get to know your authentic self and accept it, embrace it. Forged in trauma, rising as warriors.